All right. Check. 1, 2. Volume on this thing. I hope it's not too loud. Hope it's not too loud! I'm so funny. Check. 1, 2. Check. 1, 2. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Eh eh eh. Goodbye to my YouTube career because that is... Help! What's going on, you nitwits? Get it? Nitwits? Because it's like philosophical misfit like me, except instead of misfit, because you're the misfits, except nitwit. I probably shouldn't start this thing off with insulting everyone, so... Help. So what's up, guys? Welcome to part 2 on this series of the philosophy of truth. Diving on deep, in the deep end to the philosophy of truth with all of the philosophical jargon and names to stuff and everything. It's just good stuff. So, yeah. In part 1, we talked about the problem of truth and the liar's paradox. Now, if you have not seen part 1, go watch it right now. Click that thingy majig right there. And go check it out, watch it, because some of the terms that I'll be using in this video might be confusing if you didn't watch the first episode. So, go and check that out. But on this part 2, we will be discussing the philosophical theories on how to arrive at truth. So we kind of got a lot to cover, so let's just dive on in. So to start out, there are 3 main theories on how to arrive at truth. These are theories that were thought up throughout history, but they have lived the longest and they are the most popular, and they are Claude. Dang it, I literally just started this video and I'm already tripping over my own words. Help. Ready to go. So these 3 theories are called the neoclassical theories, and it consists of 1, the correspondence theory, 2, the coherence theory, and 3, the pragmatic theory of truth. And then we're going to go and talk about Tarski, Alfred Tarski. He was a famous philosopher. His theory on how to arrive at truth called the semantic theory, and then a theory, or actually there's lots of theories called the deflationist theories that don't like any of those other theories, and so they decided to do their own thing, which is cool. That's fine. It's philosophy. So, number 1, the first theory is the correspondence theory. This theory was thought up by Plato and revised by Aristotle in his book of Metaphysics. And it's basically, it is the theory for the layman. And it's a theory that I see a lot of atheists using, which isn't bad. I mean, theists use this too, but I see predominantly a lot of atheists using this. So it's the layman theory on how the average person would probably arrive at truth. And also it's the one that has to do with the most common sense. So if you don't have much common sense, keep listening. I'm not sure why you would admit to yourself that, yeah, I need more common sense, so I'm going to keep on listening, which, you know, if you do, then good on you. That's cool. So this theory says, in short, that a proposition is true if and only if it corresponds to reality or corresponds to an objective fact. And to quote Aristotle, and to make everything super confusing because we all love that, he says to say what it is, or what is not that it is not, is true. So thanks, Aristotle, for that one. Which is basically a philosophical fancy way of saying what is and what is not, that is the truth. What is an objective reality and what is not an objective reality, that is the truth. So it kind of goes without saying with this theory, even though we're talking about it, so I'm saying it. So water is my think juice. That with this correspondence theory, there has to be, your proposition of truth has to correspond with something objective outside of yourself, like some sort of being, which is ontology, and it has to have an ontological entity, which can look like a scientific fact that scientists have observed, and it is in objective reality. It's nothing subjective. But if we have a subjective truth, a proposition of truth, that corresponds to that ontological entity, that being, that scientific fact, then that is truth. And I say that, and I have to make this distinction, because your beliefs and knowledge aren't necessarily objective truth. So you can't use these things to correspond to. So this theory separates knowing and believing from truth. They're totally separate. It says that truth is empirical and objectively physical in reality, and knowledge and belief are subjective. And one more thing to add to this theory before I move on to the next one is that in order to really look at this theory, and for this theory to work, a lot of you aren't going to like this, but this is the reality of the situation of what I think everyone should do, is that in order to know what corresponds to objective reality, besides just your subjective self, you actually have to step outside of your belief system and look at objective reality and say, does what I hold to be true correspond to objective reality? So again, you have to step outside of your beliefs. You have to step outside of your subjectivity into what you're thinking with your mind and actually look, does this make sense to the world around me? Now, some people, not going to name anybody, I'll let you figure it out, they take these facts and they say, my belief system corresponds to the facts. But what they do is they take the facts and they conceptualize it and manipulate it to be tailored to fit into their belief system, which that doesn't count. That's the result of what happens if you refuse to have your belief system tested in front of objective reality, or if you choose to not step outside of your belief system and say, wait, what is actually true? What is the truth? What corresponds? What kind of ontological being, what thing in actual reality corresponds to what I'm thinking? Not me looking at it and trying to manipulate it and making it fit into my belief system, but does it actually fit? So if that's the case that you're doing that, then call it what it is. It's a philosophical concept and not a objective fact in objective reality, or not a empirical fact is what I'm meaning to say. So this leads right into the theory of truth number 2, which is coherence theory. And I mainly see religious people using this theory a lot, and I will explain why. So what this theory does is it takes your subjective belief system and it looks at objective reality and says, if those beliefs that I see in objective reality cohere with the beliefs that I already have, then it's true. So coherence theory measures the truth value of a proposition or of a truth to other things that could be true, could appear to be true, but what determines whether they're true or false is if they fit into your belief system. And your belief system, another way of saying what your belief system is philosophically, when you look into this coherence theory more, it's called the web of belief. So how this differs from the correspondence theory is you don't have to step outside of your belief system for this. Actually, for this theory to work, you actually have to stay inside of your belief system. Now, I'll explain this theory a little bit more, because whether we're atheist, theist, it doesn't matter. We all use this belief system because we want the world to make sense to us based on what we already believe. And so normally, that's how we would arrive at truth. If not with the correspondence theory, then with coherence theory, that we say, this is true because it makes sense to me. It coheres with my beliefs that I already have. And here's a funny little example of how we do this all the time. So this, like I said, it's a funny example, but it works. So I'm just going to read it from my notes. If there was an insane person walking through New York City saying, I see flying monkeys in Times Square, we can determine the validity of his statement by considering the beliefs or facts that we have already accepted as true. So the beliefs or facts that are already in our web of belief, already in our belief system. So we can look at our belief system and say, well, we know that monkeys don't fly, so that's reason number 1 not to regard that statement as true. And we can also say that monkeys don't roam around in New York City. Probably debatable. I'm willing to bet at some point in history there was monkeys roaming around in New York City. Maybe even flying monkeys. Who knows? I mean, it's New York City, right? And number 3, the reason that we should not believe that proposition as true is because we already have a belief that insane people have been known to hallucinate. But the most important fact to think about in what we cohere with is that everyone else in Times Square in New York City says that they don't see flying monkeys flying around in New York City. So from that we can gather that that proposition is not true. There are no flying monkeys roaming around in Times Square in New York City. So there are many different types of coherence theory propositions of how they work. You can say a proposition is true if and only if it coheres with the beliefs of the majority of persons in one society, or if it coheres with one's own beliefs, or if it coheres with the beliefs of the intellectuals in one society, or if it is consistent with all other propositions, or if it is only, if it logically coheres with things. I mean, there's so many ways that you can go about this coherence theory of truth. But the problem with this is actually a huge problem because as we talked about in part 1 of this series, is that the 3 laws of logic, not logics. One of those laws is called the law of non-contradiction. So, in truth, a truth cannot be both true and false at the same time. That would mean they contradict each other. So, it breaks that law of non-contradiction. So, in this coherence theory, if a fact is presented and we say it coheres with my belief system, so I believe that it's true. But for somebody else, it doesn't cohere with their belief system and their web of beliefs. So then it's false for them. And it gets into that truth argument, if you can even call it that, well, it's true for me, and, well, it's not true for me. It's just that breaks the laws of logic. That breaks the laws of non-contradiction. And so that can get really messy. And also, this can get even messier when you really think about it, is that if a fact is not true, if it is completely false, but it coheres with that person's belief system, even though that fact is completely false, they will regard it as true because it coheres with their belief system. It's kind of scary when you think about it. And the opposite could also be true, that even if something is... Wait. I'm trying to figure out how to word that opposite in my... You guys can figure it out. The opposite of what I just said can be true. Now, another problem... there's a lot of problems with this theory. But another problem with this theory is that it addresses measuring the truth value of comparing the relationship between truths, but it actually neglects finding what truth actually is, what truth is in itself. And just going along the lines of what I was saying before, is that, just like if we would believe something that is false just because it coheres with our belief system, this also poses the question, what if we've done that our entire lives and our belief system is just based on lies? That it's just made sense to us, and so our belief system is just wholly founded on lies. This theory works, the coherence theory works, like with the flying monkeys in New York City. But when it comes to more deeper subjects, I don't think it's the theory to go with, personally. But I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. So there's the latest version of a coherence theory of truth that's called postmodern theory of truth, or constructivist theory of truth. There might be even slight differences in those two. But I saw on one of the websites that I researched on that they were closely tied together, or the same thing. All of these theories just do that. So this postmodernism theory believes that truth is not something that's objective. It believes that truth is what the consensus of society or people says it is. So obviously, social scientists love this theory of truth, but physical scientists absolutely hate it. And if you really want to give this theory more thought, then you have to ask the question, how do we know that we can experience anything true that's outside of our subjective experience of reality? That was kind of a mouthful. So how do we know what is true when the only truth that's really we have access to is only our subjective reality? It's I'm not going to get into the difference between anti-realism and realism, but it's a very anti-realism theory of truth. So this theory, if you give it even more thought, says that truth outside of our subjective experience is just unknowable. So maybe this is a truth system or theory that agnostics use. So this theory doesn't work in a number of situations, but I think, again, well, not I think, I mean, it breaks the law of non-contradiction again, because it can have internal inconsistencies. I mean, based on society's culture, everything. It can just have so many inconsistencies within this theory. So moving on to the pragmatic theory of truth. Now, there are two ways to go about this pragmatic theory of truth. The first way is saying that a proposition is true if and only if it's useful. And an example of this would be like, I believe in God because the belief that somebody is watching over me and guiding me and gives me purpose for my life is a useful belief to have. And because it's a useful belief to have and it benefits me and it helps me get up in the morning, then I regard that as true. But this, again, breaks the law of non-contradiction. It says that it can be true for me but not for somebody else, because I might find that truth useful, but somebody else would not find it at all useful. And so a truth cannot be both true and false. Breaks the law of non-contradiction. Now, the second way to go about the pragmatic theory of truth is something that I love. I would consider myself a pragmatist. And this side of thinking pragmatically is with the scientific method. So you're taking the scientific method of experimentation, except instead of using scientific tools to observe reality, scientifically, whatever scientists do, we can use philosophical concepts and ideas and experiment with them in a group of people, saying, here's what I believe to be true, now let's test it. Let's see if this actually works. Let's see if this proves not just any benefit, because there's a difference between useful and true in this. The first theory, or the first side of this pragmatic theory that I talked about, is talking about truth and useful are the same thing. But in the second way of thinking about the pragmatic theory of truth, truth and useful are not the same thing. Obviously, the truth can be useful, but also it can be just as useful to know that something isn't true. And so with this second type of pragmatic theory, that's what the aim really is. It's figuring out what is useful and what is not useful based on what is true and what is not true. Not saying that, just like I said, if something is not true, it can also be useful. But you find this out through thought and experimentation with a group of people and questioning, and I love it. I think it's great. So with the second part of the pragmatic theory, I like it because, well, a number of reasons, but because you can't know truth by just sitting in your room and philosophically thinking about the concept of truth. You can only know truth by living life, by going out and experiencing it. So the last thing I want to mention about the pragmatic theory of truth is Charles S.C. Peirce, however you say his name. Basically, he said that his theory of this pragmatic theory of truth was that when we find something is true, if it's useful or not useful, say the truth is not useful, then it will die out. And if the truth is useful, then it will be maintained throughout history. And this is kind of his philosophical version of like something like natural selection or cosmic natural selection that happens in nature or the universe if you're talking about cosmic natural selection. So now we're getting to the semantic theory of truth by Alfred Tarski. And buckle up, I'm going to try to explain this one as best I can. Think juice. Let's do it. So Alfred Tarski created this out of formal logic, out of systems and mathematics, and literally the equation. He came up with an equation of truth because what he wanted to do was get to the skeleton of truth. He didn't want to have a sort of this proposition is true if and only if, like not through philosophical sentences or words, but he wanted to get to like kind of like math, like A plus B equals C, except he did that with philosophy and with truth. So I can only describe, this theory does have to do with language and with words. It's called the Semantic Theory. But it goes a little bit more in depth in that. And it's kind of like he used semantics to try to say what he was trying to say. And so I'll just give you an example of this on how this works. But really, what he's doing here. So he has a meta language and a language. And so basically an easier way of describing that is that we use a meta language every day, whether that's English, Spanish, Russian, Greek, Japanese, Chinese, whatever. We each have our own individual language that we use, but that is a meta language to use to describe the objective language of objective reality. So, you know, a rock could be called something in English, and the word in English would be different from the word in Greek, but we're both talking about the same thing. So that object would be objective language. And maybe an easier way to put this is that the difference between theoretical physics and actual physics. Now, theoretical physics uses meta-language like English to describe the actual mathematics and the numbers that is actual physics. And so Tarski, in this, he's trying to take a meta-language and take objective language and combine the two together to determine what is actually true. So if that wasn't already a lot to handle, let me give you an example, or another example, I guess. And really what he tried to do with this is get rid of the language barrier of truth, because linguistics do have to do with the concept of truth, but he tried to completely get rid of that language barrier and get to the actual objective reality that's outside of just our subjective meta language that we use every day. So an example of this is you have two languages. One of them is the meta language and the other one is the object language. So in this situation, the meta language will be English and the object language will be German. And so take the proposition that snow is white. So he would say that the proposition in German that snow is white, I'm not going to try to say it, but here it is right here. The proposition snow is white in German is true if and only if in English snow is white. I don't know why. I don't know if I'm going to write it up here. I mean, most of you guys speak English anyway. If you don't speak English and you're listening to me, I mean, that's pretty cool, but I guess that'd be creepy in a way. I don't know. So those two languages are put together, and the total sum that they equal is what the truth is. It's like the meta language isn't necessarily truth and the object language isn't necessarily truth, but when you put those together, if that meaning of those meta languages, both of those meta languages, that snow is white in both languages, if that is what they both mean, if that is truth, then that's truth. I'm pretty sure I've explained it well. I'm just trying to explain it a little bit better. There I go. God, I'm trying to explain it a little bit better if I haven't. And so I guess to explain meta language and object language a little bit better is we use meta language to describe the object language. If that confused you, don't listen to me at all. So, like I said, this semantic theory of truth shows us that linguistics do have something to do with truth. But what this theory neglects is the actual nature of truth itself. It's just, I mean, really, you could take this theory and, go really far with it like Alfred Tarski did. Or you could look at a dictionary. And so I've studied these in depth, but again, if you disagree with me, and I'd love to know what you think about it down in the comments. But this theory doesn't necessarily shed light. I mean, I guess life, but whatever. It doesn't necessarily shed light on how do we arrive and find what is actually true. It does get rid of that language barrier, but it doesn't address the nature of what is truth in itself. And so now we have arrived at the deflationist theory of truth. And so, like I said, deflationist theories are pretty much against everything that I just said. And there are many different types of deflationist theories, but there are two that I found that will pretty much sum up a lot of them for you. And they were the most common ones that I found, and so that's what I'm going to address. And philosophers that advocate this theory point out the fact that putting "it is true" in front of a proposition doesn't make the truth value of that statement any more or less true. And that's how you can sum up pretty much all of these deflationist theories, but let me just explain it a little bit more to you. And so the first deflationist theory is called redundancy theory, which is basically what I just described to you. It's saying that putting "it is true" in front of a proposition or statement is completely redundant. Like me saying, "It is true that I feel great today," which is not true at all, because I've tried to upload this video for the last 2 days, but my freaking Mac and stupid Premiere Pro have been acting up, and so that's why this video is getting out late. But back to what I was saying. So I could say, it is true that it is true that I do not feel great today, but the statement would be just as true if I just said, I don't feel great today. So adding "it is true" in front of the proposition doesn't make it any more or less true. It doesn't change the truth value of the statement. The second type of deflationist theory is one that I found particularly interesting, and it's called the performative theory. So this says that putting the concept of truth inside of a proposition that we're making of maybe this could be true doesn't necessarily state that the proposition or the way that the proposition is characterized is true, but it's more so stating the speaker's intentions. And let me explain it a little bit more. So what the speaker does through his or her belief systems is that they're basically performing an act, they're speaking, they're sharing their ideas, and they're giving their audience license to believe what they believe. So they are presenting a proposition and they're saying, here's the reasons why you can believe this. This is now on the table for you to believe. I am giving you the license to believe this. It might be something that you've been curious to believe before. Maybe you've been curious about it or thought about it, but now I am giving you license to actually adopt it as a belief system or as truth. So in my opinion, this is much like the role of like a pastor or an outspoken atheist. There's tons of people that listen to those type of leaders in our society, and they've wondered all of these things, and they're like, maybe this is true, maybe this isn't. But as soon as like someone like Matt Dillahunty, or someone like my dad, or a well-known preacher, I mean, I could name quite a few, when they say it, when they give license for it, then it's like, oh, now I can believe. Now it's no longer just this philosophical thought in my head, but now it either coheres with my beliefs, or now I can believe it's true, or just whatever. But this theory doesn't actually account for whether or not the proposition is actually true or false. And of course, I'm sure, just by thinking about it, just think about it, there are a lot of other issues with the performative theory as well. I mean, the redundance theory makes a bit of sense, but the performative theory, it does make sense because I grew up in church, and because, everybody does it. Everybody, when they see like somebody that talks about something that they've thought about for years, and they're like, oh, this is like, okay, now I have license to believe this. So I get it, but you still face breaking the law of logic, and you can contradict, and it can be true for this person but not true for this person, but that's not actually truth. It's just, so yeah, I mean, I'm sure you guys can figure out the rest. So that wraps it up. Those are all of the theories of truth. And well, actually, these are just some of the theories of truth. There are a lot more theories of truth. And so I'm curious, which theories do you find yourself using either every day or when you research something? What theories do you say that, well, that doesn't work at all? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, the thoughts you have on, what you use, what you do, what you think. Just tell me what you think down in the comments. This is basically what I'm trying to say. And I don't know why I just keep talking, because it's just redundant. And it's funny because I just talked about the redundancy, whatever. So in part 3, the final part of this theory, dude, I almost got, I literally have like 3 sentences left, but I need my think juice. So in part 3 of this series, we are going to wrap it up basically, but I'm going to attempt as best as possible to wrap all of this up into one cohesive concept and thought that we can all really, I mean, I'm not trying to make up my own theory or anything like that. I just want to help everyone develop know how to develop their own theories on how they arrive at truth, how it fits best in your life, and not just fits best in your life, but actually how to stand on what you believe, what you think, and also how to question what you believe and think. Because I think that our truth, things that we've thought were true our entire lives, need to be questioned. I mean, it's only when I started researching this that I realized that a lot of religious people, because I grew up religiously in a church and Christianity and stuff like that, that a lot of people use coherence theory, and it's like there's a lot of problems with coherence theory. And I was like, wow, I've done that. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if I was doing that myself. So I want to, in the next video, talk about how you can develop, I guess, these theories on, I'm going to use this one for this time, I'm going to use this one for this time, which is basically, it's pluralism, where it's not, you're not agreeing to one of these theories in particular, but you're agreeing to a couple of them, or you're just using them at different times. And so I think that will really help people out with not only grounding themselves in what they believe, but also questioning what you believe. And so, yeah, we're going to get into that next time. But if you like this video, let me know what you think down in the comments, and please like, subscribe, and share the crap out of it. And I'll see you misfits in the next one. Peace!